She was just a student pilot, not a veteran, not a hero, not someone whose name was supposed to be remembered, just a young trainee sitting in the left seat of a mid-sized training aircraft, logging hours toward a license she still felt unworthy of. Flight 712 was never meant to be anything more than another line in her logbook. Another routine exercise. Another quiet lesson in altitude control, navigation, and radio discipline. The kind of flight that instructors barely remembered afterward. The kind of flight nothing ever went wrong on. The morning had begun peacefully. The sun rose slowly over the runway, painting the airport in soft gold. Hangar doors were opening one by one. Ground crew moved with practiced calm. Engines hummed in the distance like a steady heartbeat. Everything about the day whispered reassurance. Weather briefings confirmed it. Clear skies, mild winds, excellent visibility. The kind of conditions flight schools waited days for. Perfect for a student. Passengers, mostly aviation students, observers, and a few staff members, boarded without worry. Some chatted quietly. Others stared out the windows, enjoying the novelty of flight without fear. No one sensed danger. No one felt the weight of what was coming. She adjusted her headset, her fingers moving automatically, just as she had been taught. Her hands were steady, though her heart always beat a little faster before takeoff. She loved flying, but respect for the sky came with fear. She believed that fear kept pilots alive. Beside her sat her instructor. Calm, experienced, confident. He had flown thousands of hours. Storms, crosswinds, emergency drills, nothing rattled him. His presence alone was a safety net. When he was in the cockpit, the aircraft felt invincible. Relax, he said casually as they taxied. Today's an easy one. She nodded, forcing a small smile. Easy flights were still serious to her. Every checklist mattered, every gauge meant something. She glanced at the instruments again, scanning fuel levels, airspeed indicators, engine readings. Everything was normal. The plane lifted smoothly from the runway, climbing into the open blue sky. Below them, the airport shrank. Roads twisted like ribbons. Buildings turned into tiny blocks. The world became quiet, distant, manageable. She breathed out. At cruising altitude, the instructor guided her through standard maneuvers. Gentle turns, level flight, minor corrections. She followed instructions carefully, her movements precise, her mind focused. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, too endlessly. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond where she was looking, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable. A flicker on the edge of perception, the kind of thing a tired student might imagine. Then it happened again. She glanced down at the weather radar. The screen blinked, just once, then stabilized. She frowned slightly but said nothing. Electronics glitch sometimes. It meant nothing. She kept flying. Seconds passed. The radar flickered again. This time, shapes appeared. Faint, distorted patterns where there should have been none. Colors bloomed softly across the display, like ink spreading in water. Her heart tightened. "Instructor," she said carefully, keeping her voice neutral, "can you check the radar?" He leaned in, his expression relaxed at first, then his eyes narrowed. The shapes on the screen sharpened. Dark clouds. Not on the forecast, not on the briefing, not supposed to be there. Outside the cockpit windows, the sky still looked harmless. Blue. Bright. Calm. But the instruments told a different story. Wind readings shifted. Pressure values wavered. The plane gave a small, almost playful bump. Passengers laughed softly, assuming it was light turbulence. The instructor straightened in his seat. He muttered. She swallowed. More bumps followed. Stronger this time. The aircraft shuddered slightly, like it was brushing against unseen hands. She looked ahead. The horizon had changed. What had been blue moments ago now held shadows. Massive clouds were rising fast, towering upward like walls. Gray swallowed white. Light faded. Storm clouds don't move the way people expect. They don't rush at you. They grow. They expand until suddenly, you realize you're already inside them. The cockpit lighting dimmed automatically as sunlight vanished. The world outside turned dull and colorless. Rain struck the windshield. At first, gently, then harder, much harder. Her breathing quickened. "This wasn't on the forecast," she whispered. "No," the instructor said quietly. Another jolt rocked the plane. This one wasn't playful. This one demanded attention. He checked his instruments, his jaw tightening just enough for her to notice. For the first time since she'd met him, his calm seemed calculated. He reached for the radio, but before he could speak, turbulence slammed the aircraft downward. The altitude needle dropped sharply. Passengers gasped. A few screamed. The plane groaned as if protesting the sky itself. She gripped the controls, instinctively trying to stabilize the aircraft. Her training kicked in, but her mind raced ahead of her hands. Rain blurred the windshield. Lightning flashed somewhere inside the clouds, briefly illuminating their terrifying size. The instructor exhaled slowly. Then he turned to her. His eyes locked onto hers. This was no longer a lesson. This was no longer routine. "You have control," he said. The words were simple. 4 syllables. But they landed like a sentence. Her mouth went dry. "What?" she asked, certain she'd misheard. "You have control," he repeated, firm now. Calm, but unmistakably serious. Her hands tightened on the yoke. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Students didn't take control in unplanned storms. Students didn't face unpredictable weather without preparation. Students relied on instructors. She searched his face for reassurance, for the hint of a smile, for a sign this was still a controlled exercise. There was none. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, alarms chirped briefly before going silent again. The aircraft lurched once more, harder than before. Her instructor watched her closely. "Fly the plane," he said. "Trust your training." Her mind screamed questions. Why now? Why me? Why wasn't he taking over? But there was no time. The storm was closing in. Clouds wrapped around the aircraft, erasing all sense of direction. Up looked like down. The horizon vanished. Rain and wind assaulted the fuselage. Passengers were no longer calm. Crying filled the cabin. Prayers whispered in shaking voices. She stared forward, her knuckles white, her heartbeat thundering louder than the storm outside. This was supposed to be a simple training flight. Clear skies, calm passengers, a confident instructor beside her. Instead, she sat in the pilot's seat of Flight 712, surrounded by darkness and noise, holding the lives of everyone on board in her trembling hands. And she had no idea, that this moment, right here, was the last normal moment of her life. Within minutes, the plane was inside the storm. Not skirting its edge, not brushing past its outer clouds. Inside it. The change was immediate and brutal. The sky outside the cockpit windows disappeared as if someone had erased it. What had once been open blue space turned into a moving wall of gray and black. Clouds swallowed the aircraft from every direction, wrapping it in darkness so complete it felt unreal, like flying through the inside of a living thing. Thunder cracked without warning. The sound didn't come from far away. It exploded around them, shaking the cockpit so violently that the overhead panels rattled. The aircraft trembled from nose to tail, every vibration traveling straight through her seat and into her bones. Rain slammed into the windshield like bullets. Not droplets, not sheets. Impacts. Each strike was loud enough to be felt, the glass shuddering under the assault as if the storm were testing its strength. The wipers struggled, sweeping back and forth in a desperate rhythm, but visibility vanished almost completely. The outside world became a blur of water, shadow, and sudden flashes of white. Lightning split the clouds. For a fraction of a second, the entire storm lit up, revealing towering cloud walls stretching endlessly in every direction. Then darkness returned, thicker than before. The plane dropped suddenly. Her stomach lifted as gravity disappeared for half a heartbeat. Alarms chirped sharply, then fell silent again, as if even the systems were unsure how to react. She tightened her grip on the controls. Easy, easy, she whispered to herself, trying to keep the aircraft level as turbulence slammed them sideways. Passengers screamed. The sound cut through her like a knife. It wasn't one scream. It was many. Sharp, panicked cries mixed with shouting and sobbing. Luggage shifted in the overhead bins. Something crashed to the floor in the cabin behind them. The illusion of safety shattered completely. Flight 712, maintain heading, she heard over the radio, distorted by static. Maintain heading. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. There was no heading anymore. No visible horizon. No sense of direction. The plane was being thrown around like a toy. She glanced at her instructor. He had gone very still. At first, she thought he was concentrating, analyzing instruments, calculating their next move. His hands rested near his lap, his gaze unfocused, fixed somewhere past the instrument panel. "Instructor?" she said, raising her voice over the noise. No response. Another violent jolt slammed the aircraft downward. Her headset shifted, pressing painfully against her ears. She fought the controls, correcting instinctively, sweat breaking across her forehead. "Instructor," she shouted. She turned toward him, and her breath caught in her throat. His head had slumped forward. His eyes were closed. His body was unmoving. For one horrifying second, her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. It searched for a rational explanation. Fatigue, momentary disorientation, a joke in terrible taste. Then the plane dropped again. Harder. "Instructor," she yelled, reaching toward him with one hand while struggling to keep the other on the yoke. No movement. No answer. His headset hung crookedly. His chest did not rise. Panic surged through her like electricity. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, her voice cracking. She shook his arm. Nothing. Her heart began to pound so violently it hurt. Blood roared in her ears, competing with the thunder outside. The realization hit her all at once. He had collapsed, possibly unconscious, possibly worse, the person she depended on. The safety net, the authority in the cockpit. Gone. The aircraft lurched violently to the left, snapping her back into the moment. She forced her hands back onto the controls, fighting the storm with movements that were now less precise, more desperate. The plane was losing altitude, fast. The altimeter needle spun downward, each tick screaming danger. Warning lights flickered on the panel, glowing red and amber in the dim cockpit. "Pull up." Someone screamed from the cabin. Another passenger cried out in prayer. She wanted to scream back that she was trying, but she couldn't spare the breath. Rain hammered the windshield so hard she wondered if it would crack. Lightning flashed again, followed instantly by thunder so loud it felt like a physical blow. The aircraft shuddered as if it might tear itself apart. Her hands were shaking now. She had trained for emergencies. Engine failures. Instrument malfunctions. Even simulated pilot incapacitation. Simulated, not real, not in a storm, not with hundreds of lives behind her. "Instructor," she said again, her voice barely more than a plea. "Please." She checked his pulse with trembling fingers. Nothing she could feel. Her chest tightened, fear clawing at her throat. She was running out of time. The plane dipped again, nose angling downward as turbulence overwhelmed her corrections. She forced herself to breathe, counting each inhale, each exhale, just like her instructor had taught her during stressful maneuvers. Focus on the aircraft, fly the plane, one step at a time. But the cabin noise grew louder, panic feeding panic. People cried, shouted, clutched armrests. The fear behind her was a living thing, pressing against her back. She had never felt so small, never felt so unprepared. She was a student pilot, a trainee, someone who was supposed to observe and learn, not command. Yet here she was, alone at the controls of Flight 712, trapped inside a violent storm, with no instructor to guide her and no clear path out. Her training screamed at her to call for help. She reached for the radio, her fingers clumsy with fear. "May," her voice cracked, She swallowed and tried again. Mayday, 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 she said, forcing the words out clearly. This is Flight 712. We are in severe turbulence. Instructor incapacitated. Student pilot at controls. Static answered her at first. Then a voice cut through. Calm, steady, almost unreal in its control. Flight 712, we hear you. Tears stung her eyes, but relief lasted only a second. Another violent drop sent passengers screaming again. The plane shuddered, alarms flaring louder this time, more urgent. The storm showed no sign of easing. Fuel burned faster than planned. Instruments danced wildly. The aircraft was fighting forces far stronger than her hands. She tightened her grip on the controls. She was terrified. She was overwhelmed. And yet, beneath the panic, something else stirred. A cold, sharp awareness. There was no one else. No instructor. No backup. No second chance. Only her, a student pilot. A violent storm. Hundreds of lives, and one terrifying realization that settled deep in her chest, heavier than fear itself. She was alone. The aircraft began to lose altitude fast. Not slowly, not gradually. Fast. The altimeter needle slid downward with terrifying speed, each tick a reminder that gravity was winning. The plane no longer felt like a machine obeying commands. It felt like a wounded animal, heavy and unresponsive, fighting to stay in the air. Warning alarms screamed non-stop. Sharp, piercing sounds filled the cockpit, overlapping one another in a chaotic chorus. Overspeed warnings. Altitude alerts. Systems protesting all at once. The noise was relentless, designed to demand attention, but now it only added to the terror. Her hands trembled on the controls. She could feel it in her arms, in her fingers, in the way every correction came a fraction of a second too late. Fear threatened to take control, to turn her movements wild and useless. But somewhere beneath the panic, memory surfaced. Training. Checklists. Simulations. Her instructor's voice repeating the same lesson over and over. When everything goes wrong, fly the plane first. She forced her breathing to slow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The storm hurled the aircraft sideways again, but this time she anticipated it. She countered with a controlled movement, stabilizing the wings just enough to stop the drop from worsening. Not perfect, but enough. The cabin behind her erupted in another wave of screams as the plane jolted violently. Someone cried out in pain. A child wailed. Fear echoed off the metal walls. She blocked it out. If she let herself feel their terror, she would freeze. Her eyes darted across the instrument panel. Airspeed, unstable. Altitude, falling. Fuel, lower than it should be. Much lower. Her chest tightened. They were burning fuel faster than planned, fighting the storm with raw power. Every minute inside these clouds brought them closer to a point of no return. She had to get help. Now. Her hand reached for the radio, fingers shaking so badly she almost missed the switch. Mayday. Her voice broke. She swallowed hard, forcing the word out again. Stronger this time. Mayday. 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 This is Flight 712. Her voice echoed in her headset, thin and unsteady. The storm roared around her, static crackling over the radio, as if the sky itself were trying to drown her out. Flight 712, she continued. We are experiencing severe turbulence. Instructor incapacitated. Student pilot at the controls. We are losing altitude. For a terrifying moment there was nothing but static. No answer. Her heart pounded harder. She pictured the radar screen, empty skies, no one listening, her call disappearing into the storm. Then a voice cut through, clear. Calm. Controlled. Flight 7112, this is approach control. We have you. She exhaled sharply, barely realizing she had been holding her breath. We hear you. The voice continued. Remain calm. Remain calm. The words felt almost impossible. Another alarm screamed as the plane dipped again. She fought the controls, muscles burning, sweat dripping into her eyes. I'm a student pilot, she admitted, shame and fear tangled in her voice. I don't know if I can. Listen carefully, the controller interrupted, his tone firm but steady. You can land this plane. The words struck her like electricity. Land the plane. The responsibility crashed down on her all at once, not just keeping it airborne, but bringing it safely to the ground. She glanced at the instruments again, trying to absorb everything at once. Yes, sir, she said, though doubt churned violently inside her. We're diverting you, the controller said. Nearest suitable runway is Delta Field. Short runway. Wind gusts strong, visibility limited. Short runway. Her stomach dropped. Short runways were unforgiving. There was no room for hesitation, no space for mistakes. Land too fast, you overshoot. Too slow, you stall. The storm rattled the aircraft again, harder than before. Fuel status? The controller asked. She checked the gauge. The number made her blood run cold. Fuel is low, she said quietly. Very low. A pause. Then, understood. She imagined the controller's radar screen, the small blinking dot that represented Flight 712, descending through chaos while dozens of trained professionals watched helplessly. Flight 712, he said, we're going to walk you through this step by step. Step by step. She clung to the phrase like a lifeline. Her instructor lay unmoving beside her, a silent reminder of how quickly everything had gone wrong. She pushed the thought aside. Focus. Fly the plane. The storm showed no mercy. Turbulence tossed the aircraft violently, slamming her shoulder against the seat, wrenching the controls in her hands. She fought back, correcting, adjusting, refusing to let go. Descend to 3,000 feet, the controller instructed. Reduce speed gradually. She obeyed, hands trembling, eyes flicking between instruments and the blurred darkness outside. Lightning flashed again, so close it turned the cockpit white. Thunder followed instantly, a deafening roar that shook her teeth. Passengers screamed again. A flight attendant's voice cracked over the intercom, trying to calm them, trying to sound brave. She wondered if they could hear the alarms, if they knew how close the edge was. Runway length is limited, the controller warned. You must touch down at the markers. No float. No float. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Every mistake now had consequences measured in lives. Fuel continued to drain. The gauge dipped closer to empty, each movement slow and merciless. She imagined the engine sputtering, imagined silence. No, she whispered, not yet. The runway lights appeared faintly on her navigation display, so close yet still so far. The storm battered them relentlessly, as if determined to stop them from escaping. Her hands ached, her arms burned, her throat felt tight, raw from fear and shouting. But she kept going, because stopping meant falling, because giving up meant death. The controller's voice never wavered. You're doing well, he said. Stay with me. Doing well. The words felt surreal, spoken into a nightmare. The runway was short. The storm was brutal. Fuel was running low. And she knew deep in her bones that there would be no second attempt. No go around. No retry. This was it. One approach. One landing. One chance. One mistake. And it was over. Silence filled the cabin as the wheels touched the runway, hard but straight. For a split second no one breathed. No screams. No prayers. No alarms. Just the raw, violent sound of rubber meeting asphalt at terrifying speed. The impact slammed through the aircraft, rattling every bolt, every bone. The landing gear screamed in protest, absorbing the force of a descent that was never meant to be that fast. The nose dipped dangerously low, and for one horrifying heartbeat, it felt like the plane might collapse forward. But it didn't. She held the controls with everything she had left in her body, muscles screaming, arms locked, refusing to let go. The plane slid. Not rolled. Slid. The tires lost grip on the rain-soaked runway, skidding sideways as water sprayed up in massive white walls. The storm howled around them, wind shoving against the fuselage like invisible hands trying to throw them back into the sky. Then came the sparks. Bright. Violent. Terrifying. Metal scraped against the runway as one wheel dipped too low. A shower of orange light burst beneath the wing, lighting up the cockpit windows like fireworks at the end of the world. Passengers screamed again, this time not in panic, but in raw animal terror. She heard the sound of something breaking. Felt the aircraft shudder violently. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Not now. Please, not now. She adjusted the rudder, fighting the slide, correcting inch by inch. Every movement mattered. Every correction was the difference between survival and catastrophe. The runway rushed past beneath them. Too fast. Too short. Her eyes locked onto the end lights approaching rapidly through the rain. Stop. 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 She pulled back slightly, easing pressure, trusting instinct where training ended. The brakes screamed, the engines roared, then whined, then began to die as fuel finally ran out. The plane slowed, still sliding, still shaking, still alive. And then it stopped. No explosion, no fireball, no impact at the end of the runway, just sudden, impossible stillness. For 1 second, nothing. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, time froze. She sat perfectly still, hands still gripping the controls, chest heaving, ears ringing. Her vision blurred, tears spilling freely now that adrenaline no longer held them back. She was afraid to move, afraid that if she did, the moment would shatter. Behind her no one spoke. No one screamed. No one cried. Then someone clapped. One soft, shaky clap. Then another. Then many. The cabin exploded with sound. Applause crashing against the walls, sobs breaking free, voices shouting prayers in every language imaginable. People cried openly now. Some laughed hysterically. Others dropped to their knees in the aisle, thanking God, fate, luck, anything that had allowed them to live. A child yelled, "We're alive." And for the first time since entering the storm, she smiled. Not a big smile. A small, broken one. Because she was alive too. Red and blue lights flooded the windows as emergency crews rushed in, their vehicles cutting through the rain like guardians arriving just in time. Firefighters surrounded the aircraft. Medics ran toward the doors. Radios crackled with urgent but relieved voices. The cockpit door opened. Fresh air rushed in, cold and real. Someone touched her shoulder gently. "You did it," a rescuer said, awe clear in his voice. "You brought them down." She looked down at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably now. She hadn't noticed. They helped her unbuckle, her legs barely able to support her weight as she stood. She glanced once at her instructor, still unconscious but alive. Breathing, stabilized by medics. Relief washed over her so hard she nearly collapsed. Passengers filed past her as they evacuated. Some stopping to hug her. Others to touch her arm. Many unable to speak through tears. "Thank you," someone whispered. "You saved us," another said. She didn't know how to respond. She had never imagined this moment. Outside, rain continued to fall, softer now, as if the storm itself was finally exhausted. The runway glistened under emergency lights, scarred with skid marks and burn trails that told the story of how close it had been. How close they had all come to dying. She stood there, wrapped in a blanket, watching survivors walk away from the aircraft. Mothers holding children, strangers holding hands, lives continuing, because one student pilot had refused to give up. Reporters would later ask how she did it, how she stayed calm, how she landed a damaged plane in a storm, how she made the right decisions under impossible pressure. She would never have a perfect answer, because the truth was, she had been terrified. She had doubted herself every second. She had wanted to scream, to run, to hand the controls to someone else. But there was no one else. So she flew. That day she didn't just land an aircraft, she crossed a line. From student to pilot. From trainee to leader. From ordinary to unforgettable. Flight 712 would be written into reports and records. But her name would be remembered in hearts. That day she wasn't a student pilot anymore. She became a hero.